I can't find Crazy Horse, can't find Hoffa, and Amelia's missing somewhere out at sea. And I hope they're happy, having a party.
Hey there, movie nerds. Abby here with a belated review of the new movie, Night at the Museum, Battle of the Smithsonian. Now, I realize I'm a week late with this review, but gosh darn it, I promised myself that I was going to see this movie and I was going to tell you all what I thought. So here I am. Of course, this movie is the sequel to the film Night at the Museum, starring Ben Stiller as a new night guard at the Museum of Natural History in New York City, who discovers that the exhibits come to life after nightfall. This installment sees the exhibits from the New York Natural History Museum being shipped off to the National Archives under the Smithsonian Museum system in Washington, D.C., after it's decided that the museum in New York needs to undergo a technological upgrade. Of course, Ben Stiller's character, Larry Daly, who has since left the museum to create a successful invention business, decides that he needs to go back and protect his friends after he gets a somewhat troubled phone call from his friend Jedediah, played by Owen Wilson, telling him that the new playmates that they found at the Smithsonian Museum aren't necessarily the friendly types. Turns out that the Egyptian pharaoh Khamun-Ra, brother of the New York Museum's Amun-Ra, owner of the tablet that brings all of the characters in the museum to life, has himself come to life after the capuchin monkey that came from the New York Natural History Museum stole the magical tablet, and now wants to take over the world and is holding all of the New York characters hostage. Now it's up to Larry to save all of his friends and possibly the world. Now, if that setup seemed unnecessarily complicated to you, that's because it is. This movie started out with a plot that was a little too complex considering the nature of the sequel, and if it's been a while since you've seen the first movie, or if you haven't seen the first movie, you may be a bit lost at the outset. Be warned about that. And the movie does have several other rather gaping plot holes. This is far from being a perfect film. But gosh darn it if it isn't an enjoyable film. Now, I was a pretty big fan of the first Night at the Museum because, well, growing up I was a bit of a museum geek, and honestly I still am. I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up surrounded with museums like the Field Museum and the Chicago Art Institute and the Museum of Science and Industry, and just places with really, really fun exhibits, and I loved every minute of those museums. I actually used to fantasize about what would happen after the doors were locked and the lights went off, if the exhibits actually came to life, and if so, what kind of adventures they had, if the paintings would visit other paintings, if they were friends with the other paintings. So, a series like Night at the Museum is pretty much tailor-made for people like me, and the sequel does even more with this. So, I mean, despite all of the many, many problems that this movie has plot-wise, I didn't mind. I had a good time. And honestly, if you like things like Night at the Museum, if, like me, you're a big museum geek, if you love the Smithsonian Museum, you're gonna love this movie too, despite all of its problems. The ever-fantastic Hank Azaria puts in a great comedic performance as Khamun-Ra, the villain of the piece, and I had a feeling from the trailer that this was going to end up being the Hank Azaria show, and, well, I was pretty much right. Fortunately, I don't mind because I love Hank Azaria and I think he's a great actor, but there were loads and loads and loads of other great comic actors in this movie who didn't get a whole lot to do. Christopher Guest as Ivan the Terrible, Jonah Hill as a museum guard who is in there for like maybe a minute. Jay Baruchel is in this movie for a very short period of time. Mindy Kaling and Craig Robinson from The Office, also in this film for a really, really, really short time. Ricky Gervais reprises his role as the grumpy museum curator from the New York Museum of Natural History, but even though he has more screen time in this movie, he's not nearly as funny as he was in the first. He's kind of the straight man here. He's an exposition guy. He's kind of bookending the movie. He's there at both the very beginning and the very end, but he's not doing a whole lot, and he's not funny, and you can kind of tell that he's resenting this, because he gives a lot of depressed, sad sighs and looks off into the middle distance thinking, I could have had so much fun with this character, but I didn't get to. Steve Coogan, who also comes back as Octavius, the miniature diorama Roman character who in the first movie was enemies first and then friends later with Owen Wilson's Jedediah cowboy diorama character, had a lot more to do in the first movie than he does in this. He and Owen Wilson both are not nearly as fun. They're just kind of there for, like, gratuitous, hey, these guys were in the first movie roles, which is disappointing. So there are lots of great actors in this movie. There are a lot of really great possibilities for comedic roles. Bill Hader is another actor who gets some funny parts, but not nearly as many as he could have had. Like I said, there's some great comedic performances, but they tend to be kind of lopsided, and I think there was more potential here that could have been mined and wasn't. Now, easily the strongest part of the movie is the sequence towards the beginning of the Night of Antics that takes place in the National Gallery of Art, where the paintings and the sculptures, just like my childhood dreams, come to life. I pretty much geeked out during this entire sequence. At one point I looked over at my mom and I went, I am having this much fun! You can't see my arms, they're going out really, really wide. The sculptures in the paintings come to life. People get to go inside the paintings. Ben Stiller and Amy Adams, who plays native Kansan pilot Amelia Earhart, get to go inside of the iconic photograph of the Navy sailor kissing the nurse and get to run around in there. There's a really neat appearance by Jay Baruchel and a fun little continuance of that scene in the credits after Ben Stiller accidentally leaves his phone there. Keep an eye out for that. It's pretty fun. This could have been its own film as far as I was concerned, because I love art museums and I love the idea of the paintings going and getting to visit the other paintings. I'm sorry for the nerd out here, but I mean, you need to see this. If for any other reason, just watch it for the sequence in the National Gallery of Art. I mean, the fountain at the front, the Cupids are a boy band. It's that fun. It's that clever. So, final verdict. Night at the Museum. The setup was much, much stronger in the first one, but the antics and the adventures had in the museum are, well, they're more fun. I had a lot of fun with this movie, despite all of its major problems, and if you have small children, or if you're a kid at heart, like me, you'll probably enjoy yourself too. So for the Two Awesome Movie Nerds, this is Abby Olchesi. Go forth and watch.